Our next presenter is Matthew Korpman. He's an adjunct religion professor at La Sierra University. He is the founder of theoeducation.com, the Adventist Church's largest source of continuing theological education, servicing pastors and scholars in over 11 countries. He's also the author of the best-selling book, Saying No to God, a radical approach to reading the Bible faithfully, which has been used in various Adventist universities as a textbook for Adventist hermeneutics. His paper today is titled, Can the Dead Speak in Times of Grief? Ellen White's Dream of Her Departed Husband and the Influence of Second Maccabees. Welcome, Matthew.
Thank you so much. What should you do if a dead loved one visits you? It's a question that most Seventh-day Adventists have no trouble addressing right away. The answer? Get thee behind me, Satan. It is a common trope of Adventist evangelists to warn others to give no heed to the deceiving spirits. Although Ellen White spoke out against mediums and rejected the belief in ghosts, and in many ways is the primary reason Adventists have their strongly held beliefs about the dead, only 5 weeks after her own husband had died, she reported that she had a dream in which the spirit of her husband appeared to her and delivered divine instructions from God's throne. Not only does she not believe that the apparition is a demon or deception, but she actually obeys the instructions and attributes her successes in the future to following her husband's ghostly advice. Theologians within Adventism have struggled with how to handle this oddity in the life of White and to better understand how she herself processed the experience with her beliefs about the state of the dead. In this paper, a new approach to this issue will be outlined. So on Monday, September 12, 1881, Ellen White signed her name to a letter she would send off to her son, William White. It was 5 weeks after her husband, James White, had died. This letter, first published in portions back in 1985, revealed a startling moment for Adventism's prophetess. She wrote of her extreme grief, noting that, quote, I miss Father more and more, especially do I feel his loss while here in the mountains. It is within this context of extreme sorrow and grief that she reports a dream, quote unquote, she experienced. And here is an excerpt. A few days since, I was pleading with the Lord for light in regards to my duty. In the night, I dreamed I was in the carriage, driving, sitting at the right hand. Father was in the carriage, father here in reference to James White. Father was in the carriage, seated at my left hand. He was very pale, but calm and composed. Why, Father, I exclaimed, I am so happy to have you by my side once more. I have felt that half of me was gone. Father, I saw you die. I saw you buried. Has the Lord pitied me and let you come back to me again, and we work together as we used to? He looked very sad. He said, the Lord knows what is best for you and for me. My work was very dear to me. We have made a mistake. She describes this as a dream, but intriguingly, James White speaks in the first person, expressing his concerns about his own past life and her own. He complains, quote, we have responded to urgent invitations of our brethren to attend important meetings we had not the heart to refuse. These meetings have worn us both more than we were aware. Next, he directs Ellen to resist accepting invitations to speak. We might have done a great deal for years with our pens on subjects the people need that we have had light upon and can present before them, which others do not have. Thus, you can work when your strength returns as it will, and you can do far more with your pen than with your voice. He looked at me appealingly and said, the ghost, you will not neglect these cautions, will you, Ellen? Will you do this now? Will you, as your strength returns, take your pen and write out these things we have so long anticipated and make haste slowly? There is important matter which the people need. Make this your first business. You will have to speak to some to the people, but shun the responsibilities which have borne us down. Finally, it is Ellen's turn to reply, and her focus is not on the missional work, her writing, or any other theological topics. It's her dead husband she's concerned with. Well, said I, James, you are always to stay with me now, and we will work together. Said he in reply, I stayed in Battle Creek too long. I ought to have gone to California more than 1 year ago. but I wanted to help the work and institutions at Battle Creek. I have made a mistake. Your heart is tender. You will be inclined to make the same mistakes I've made. Your life can be of use to the cause of God. Oh, those precious subjects the Lord would have had me bring before the people, precious jewels of light. I awoke, but this dream seemed so real. Now you can see, writing William, and understand why I feel no duty to go to Battle Creek for the purpose of shouldering the responsibilities of the General Conference. I have no duty to stand in General Conference. The Lord forbids me. That is enough. In the end, she concludes the letter, known to us by the label Letter 17, 1881, leaving William and us as readers aware of her raw grief and her unique and strange encounter with dead James. So, the strangest part of Ellen White's dream is probably the mere fact she didn't question it. The natural presumption, I think, of many Adventists in Ellen White's position that night would be to critique it as, quote, counterintelligence from one of the deceptive spirits Ellen spent so much time writing against. And yet, she doesn't. She obeys it. Although a subject of online criticism by those who accuse her of the occult, some like William Fagel, a previous associate director of the White Estate, have tried to defend it, noting that, quote, it is an account of an interesting and completely understandable incident from Ellen White's life that the White Estate trustees felt might be of interest to people who have also lost their life companions. It goes without saying that Ellen White was against spiritualism. Some of her earliest visions claimed supernatural insights into the satanic wrappings of the area, and her lengthy treatment on the topic of spiritualism in the book Great Controversy is representative of her views throughout her lifetime of writing on the topic. Yet this only deepens the confusion. Why did she embrace so readily the dream, and even when seemingly recognizing it was only a dream, still obey and follow the counsel of her dead husband? For a potential answer, we must turn to a book that used to be in Adventist Bibles, but has been missing for the past 100 years. The past few decades have seen an explosion of research in the area of Ellen White's relationship, knowledge, and use of the Apocrypha and larger pseudepigraphic literature. The Apocrypha is a collection of specific books that were contained in the middle of the King James Bible for most of its history, and many of those books, but not all, are part of the formal Old Testament for most Christians worldwide amongst the Catholic and Orthodox faiths. What is important to note here for the brevity of time is that it has been conclusively demonstrated that she both read and valued the Apocrypha in some way, having received at least 3 different visions on the topic over a 5-year period ranging from 1845 to 1850. While affirming the typical Protestant canon as the, quote, standard by which people are judged, she argued that the Apocrypha was intended for the, quote, wise as a supplement of sorts. She apparently maintained these beliefs until her death, for William White wrote as late as 1911 that his mother believed parts of the Apocrypha were inspired the same as Scripture, something she explicitly had claimed in her vision from September 1849. Among the books from that collection, which she is known both to have read from and utilized in her writings, is the apocryphal work of 2nd Maccabees. It focuses on Judas Maccabee and his fight against the Seleucid Empire for the freedom of the Jewish people against Antiochus Epiphanes IV. The event, celebrated today as Hanukkah. So influential was 2nd Maccabees that Ellen White repeats numerous times throughout her literary career the very story from it of the hiding of the Ark of the Covenant as told in 2nd Maccabees 2, 1, 4 through 8. She even repeats with confidence in her writings the prophecy Jeremiah provided in 2nd Maccabees 2, 7 to 8 about when the Ark of the Covenant might be rediscovered. Yet one area of potential influence may have been overlooked. In 2nd Maccabees 15, a tale is told of how Judas Maccabee, on the eve of a crucial battle, revived his soldiers. Quote, and so comforting them out of the law and the prophets, and withal putting them in mind of the battles that they had won afore, he made them more cheerful. He told them a dream worthy to be believed, as if it had been so indeed, which did not little rejoice them. 2nd Maccabees 15, 9 to 11, King James Version. And I'm going to read, for clarity's sake, the NRSV-UE's version of this passage that continues. What he saw was this: Onias, who had been high priest, a noble and good man, of modest bearing and gentle manner, Onias is dead, just to clarify, one who spoke fittingly and had been trained from childhood in all that belongs to excellence, was praying with outstretched hands for the whole body of the Jews. Then, in the same fashion, another appeared, distinguished by his gray hair and dignity, and of marvelous majesty and authority. And Onias spoke, saying, "This is a man who loves the family of Israel and prays much for the people and the holy city. Jeremiah, the prophet of God." Also dead. Jeremiah stretched out his right hand and gave Judas a golden sword, and as he gave it, he addressed him thus, "Take this holy sword, a gift from God, with which you will strike down your adversaries." Encouraged by the words of Judas, so noble and so effective in arousing valor and awakening courage in the souls of the young, they, the soldiers, determined not to carry out on a campaign, but to attack bravely and to decide the matter by fighting hand to hand with all courage, because the city, the sanctuary, and the temple were in danger. End quote. In an article attacking Ellen White as a false prophet, Sidney Cleveland remarks, "Don't you think Ellen White should have instantly known that any communication with the dead is prohibited in Scripture, especially when she wrote widely on this topic? By examining the book of 2 Maccabees, chapter 15, which was in her Bible and other Adventist Bibles at the time, it becomes possible to better understand why this was not the case. Like Ellen White, Judas Maccabee related a dream worthy to be believed as if it had been so indeed. Not that it was real, but that it was an encouraging message sent from God. Like Ellen White, Judas Maccabee sees dead prophets and dead high priests who speak with him and with messages from God about future actions both should take. In 2 Maccabees, through the example of Judas Maccabee, White had a ready example of a vision given to a man from God that involved symbolic representations of dead people, a, quote, dream that was intended to encourage those with little hope to keep fighting to live. Aside from her familiarity with the Apocrypha and how 2 Maccabees may have likely provided her that biblical quote-unquote framework from which to interpret her experience of grief, another source from White's early history also provides a foundation from which to process her quote dream, and his name was William Foy. Foy, a black minister in training, was one of a number of early Millerite visionaries who preceded White's own visions in December of 1844. The subject of racist newspaper attacks and able to draw crowds of thousands, at least according to some, Foy caused a stir wherever he went between 1842 and 1844. He was also one of the largest influences on the young Ellen Harmon shortly before her own visionary experiences began. Foy is important not only for her early years, but for her later. For as late as 1906, she reports how strange it was that after searching, she couldn't find his published account of his visions, which she had owned throughout her life. Today, we do have a copy of those visions, which were published in 1845, after a now lost earlier edition, and anyone can download a PDF copy with a simple Google search today. Yet, few Adventists read Foy, and even fewer who do would wish to share his visions. Part of the reason for that is for the very same reason most Adventists would feel hesitant to share Ellen White's grieving letter about her dream. According to Foy, the dead continue to live in heaven. Today. Now. In his two visions, Foy reported seeing that the angels who occupy heaven are the dead of Christianity who have been sanctified and transformed. On one occasion, he notes that when he saw in the vision the 144,000 coming to heaven, he witnessed the following, and I quote the passage. "There was arrayed before me in the Spirit an innumerable multitude, which had not passed through death. Their crowns were like the brightness of the stars, and in their right hands they held cards. I then saw an individual, which had already passed through death. Her brightness was beyond the expression of mortals, and at her right side stood a guardian angel. The angel's raiment was like pure gold, and his wings like flaming fire. And as she passed me, she cried with a lovely voice, 'I am going to the gate to meet my friends.' An angel then appeared flying through the midst of this boundless place, and came to the spirit of one of those who had not passed through death, and cried with a loud voice, saying, 'This is my mother.' He then became her guide," i.e., guardian angel. Clearly, Foy's visionary account flies in the face of all Adventist teaching about the state of the dead, and that's not the only passage, it's just the one we're quoting for time. And yet, the repeated position of the White Estate in Adventism has been to recognize Foy as a true prophet. Why? As Tim Poirier noted, Ellen White accepted Foy's visions as genuine, even though at some points Foy interpreted what he saw in the light of his belief in the immortality of the soul. Even though she believed Foy was a true prophet who had seen what God wanted him to see, Ellen White also recognized that Foy could be wrong in interpreting it, or perhaps correct in relaying what was only symbolic realities. If God could show Foy dead people floating around in heaven, despite the fact that that wasn't true, then for Ellen, it wasn't much of a stretch to imagine that God was showing her a dream of her dead husband to deliver a different sort of symbolic message. Yet it is in these fascinatingly ambiguous aspects of Foy's and Ellen White's prophetic experiences that the complexity of inspiration and our theories surrounding it are threatened to break apart. For what we discover is a simple fact that many tend to forget. Visions are often symbolic, not real. Ellen White wouldn't have believed that Foy actually saw real dead people in heaven, merely that he saw a symbolic vision of something other than heaven that represented itself in that way. Similarly, White did not actually see her dead husband, but a symbolic representation presented as such. In other words, the visions weren't about real things, they were only symbols. In conclusion, this paper has tried to demonstrate three things within the time span. First, that Ellen White was influenced by the Apocrypha to such a degree that it provided a theological foundation for her to interpret and rationalize difficult experiences such as she had in 1881. Second, that Ellen White's navigation of William Foy's heterodox visionary experiences helps to confirm her own self-reflection on the distinction between actually seeing the reality that lies behind an image and merely seeing the image, much like the difference between pixels on a television showing Hawaii and actually seeing Hawaii. Third, and finally, that Ellen White did not believe she had actually seen her dead husband, but rather that she was comfortable exploring the varieties of ways that God chose to speak a message to her, much like God apparently chose to speak to Judas Maccabee many millenniums before. Moreover, and this is the end, the dream that White received was like the dream in 2 Maccabees 15, apocalyptic. At first glance, one doesn't recognize it. Like the Jewish soldiers grieving for their land and families, White is grieving for her lost husband and lost opportunities stolen from him. Like Judas, who was told to conquer with the sword from the vision and accomplish God's purposes, White is commissioned to go forth and begin a new era of concentration on her writing projects, which God purposes will have more impact than any of the speaking engagements that she is invited to. The consequences for Judas is the physical freedom of his people, and for Ellen, it is perceived as the spiritual abolition of her own. Her dead husband, like Judas's dead high priest, is the means by which a new era of history begins, whether in Judah's history or Ellen's personal literary career. Thank you.